This is going to be a major fight. It's going to come to a head over whether a bill that has just broad public support, three-quarters of the American people want this bill and want all provisions of this bill, the voting rights provisions, the campaign finance provisions, the gerrymandering provisions. They want all of it, and it's going to be a huge, huge test of whether there will be 51 votes to move the measure forward.